The recent e-drama is how Hassan, Vosh, and Fawnchild got banned off Twitch for using the word cracker to insult white people, and progs are screaming bloody murder that Twitch's slur policy is being equally enforced. Even though their arguments seem to be true, that cracker is derived from whip cracker and therefore is punching up at a position of power rather than punching down at the marginalized, and that anti-white insults like cracker or redneck or gammon in the UK are colloquially not considered to be nearly as serious as their anti-black counterparts. Despite that, the basic point of this is a word used to insult people on the basis of skin color, and therefore it's a slur, and therefore it's against Twitch policy, seems to supersede all of that. A lesser slur is still a slur, which is why the discourse on this topic has shifted from it's not as bad a slur because of history and power dynamics to it can't be a slur because of power dynamics. And making fun of white people for their whiteness is good, actually. And so the question must be asked, why isn't it a slur then? What makes one insult just an insult, but another insult a slur? This is a question that has been danced around online for years now, but never actually answered. The closest we ever got was during the Is Trap a Slur event from a couple of years ago, and that was a pretty widespread shit show. People were enraged that porn games on Steam, such as Trap Shrine, were popular. Using trap to refer to Cloud's cross-dressing infiltration story arc in Final Fantasy VII was considered transphobic. Men who cross-dress and use trap to describe themselves were told that their sexual existence was anti-trans. The problem with all of these points of view, of course, is that none of these people are actually trans. They're cis men who dress as women. A large part of prior waves of trans activism was normalizing the distinction between gay men, drag queens, cross-dressers, trans women, and pedophiles, in a more restrictive society that saw all of those things as one and the same. Which is why, to me, it's jarring, and frankly kinda bigoted in its own way, to see trans people try to paint trap as a slur, when trap refers to cross-dressers, not them. The leftoid counter-argument to this position, best stated by ContraPoints in her Are Traps Gay video, is that the word trap also can refer to trans women, because cis men commonly describe a feeling of being trapped when they're attracted to a trans woman without knowing that they're trans. And her argument in that video made sense back when it was made in 2019. It seemed like maybe that really was the source of the trap is a slur position, but it turned out to be wrong. In 2020, we saw a similar discourse pop up. Femboy is a slur. After the word trap was successfully pushed into the too rude to speak online camp, feminine-looking gay men who liked to dress up as women but did not identify as women began to use femboy to refer to themselves instead. And after that word's popularization, we began to see stuff like this. This is your reminder that femboy is a trans-misogynistic fetishizing slur that cis people and trans masks should not be using. Femgay is a non-fetishistic alternative to describe feminine gay people. There's also lavender boy. Please be respectful of trans femmes. I've used the FB slur to refer to femme-presenting men in the past, because at the time I was unaware that it was a slur. What actually appears to be happening here is the slurification of terms used to identify people who play with gender but are nonetheless outside of the trans community. Presumably because the LGBTQ+ movement is now a political bloc, and the existence of people who perform the practical behaviors that bloc claims to speak for while rejecting the political movement is considered an affront. You can see what I mean if you delve into the trans egg subculture online. An egg, in this case, describes a person who does not view themselves as trans, but according to outside viewers, who are usually trans themselves, is obviously just trans and hasn't figured it out yet. This doesn't seem to overlap much with being closeted, which is when you know you're trans or you're gay, and you actively hide or repress it, for a number of different reasons. The egg thing is specifically different, the core idea being that the egg doesn't actually know who they are. Spend enough time on egg areas of the internet and you will find a lot of anti-crossdresser, anti-trap, and anti-femboy stuff. Their position is that all of these things are actually just trans in denial, and that they are eggs needing to be hatched. That is, pushed into accepting a trans identity that they may or may not feel comfortable with. Part of the hatching process, by the more immoral parts of the egg community, is the slurification of words used by these gender nonconformists, so that the only option available to self-identify as somebody who plays with gender is trans. This is the first way the idea of a word as a slur is pushed, when an outside group would see their own status rise if a term used to define their cultural opposition is suddenly no longer allowed to be spoken. The second way is when the group themselves decide that the term used to identify them is a slur because they find it insulting or demeaning, and they use that victimhood status to garner power. This second way seems to be the far more popular method of slurification. Boomer, TERF, incel, simp, and cuck have all gone through a relatively small slurification event in the past couple of years, where the people who are correctly identified by those labels understand that the labels aren't used positively, and so have tried to push the idea that their use is a slur, with little success because most people aren't actually that dumb. Perhaps the most famous push in this regard was for the word Karen, probably because the people who are most affected by the label, white women, are the old benefactors of the previous round of prog activism, which focused mainly on white women's feminism. So the people who were called Karen had more resources and political capital to spend on spreading the idea that Karen is a slur, which in the end didn't mean much because videos of Karens losing their mind in public still go viral to this very day. It turns out you can't just push a change like this. And if you push it too hard, people will be incentivized to rebel against you just for the sake of it. And then you get some really weird ones where it's clear that people just don't want to be made fun of. Okay, so there's stuff like why the word retard is a slur and why only neurodivergent people can say it, a thread by a neurodivergent person. We're not going to read this whole last thread, it's retarded. But it contains some common enough concepts that link us into this take. The words idiot and imbecile are oppressive, and I'm begging y'all to do some research into disability history at some point. This is actually technically correct. If you dig into the history of any insult that is nowadays used to refer to someone's intelligence, they all come from old terms or loanwords originally used to refer to people with mental disabilities. But the point seems to be that nobody uses these words now. Nobody is referring to a disabled person when they say idiot, and considering these words slurs due to old connotations feels like a stretch. Is your head spinning already? Let's continue down the rabbit hole. When straight women say "yas queen," it feels like a slur. A slur towards who exactly? Towards the target, the so-called queen? Towards the straight woman herself? Or towards the gay people who aren't even in the conversation but who use "yas queen"? Stop calling women thick, we can't control our curves. Okay, this one just has to be a troll. My sister just said, is that texturism? When I made fun of her natural hair. Poe, you've got to do something with that sister of yours. I mean, like, if she's a little sister, send her to Dimitri Monroe. He'll straighten her out. Both her and the hair. The term sus is rooted in homophobia. The only way this one makes sense is if you consider the older idea of the gaydar to be homophobic. Both terms refer to the idea of being able to tell if somebody else is gay or trans without them telling you. Listen, if the argument is that the LGBT community isn't filled with infiltrators, why do you get real weird about people vocalizing their acknowledgement of you? Stop using straight to mean not queer. Seriously, fucking stop it. You're excluding trans hets. For the love of God, just say allo cis hets. I don't even know what any of this fucking means. It is important to look at the word queer, though. It used to be an archaic term referring to something that is strange. It later became an insult towards any non-standard sexuality, and now it's been reclaimed, or at least some people think so. Reminder that queer as a slur is a rad film dog whistle. We're here, we're queer, and we don't fit into their shitty, transphobic, kinkphobic, biphobic, panphobic, aphobic, NB-phobic worldview. So, which point of view is correct? Some people do still use the word queer with its older slur definition attached. Other people also use the word queer to identify with themselves, almost like with trap. Why is it that queer was allowed to be reclaimed and self-identified with, but trap was not? The answer seems to be that even though slurs are bad, they're also very convenient. They're a great way of empowering your own speech, stifling somebody else's speech, gaining victimhood status, or putting others down consequence-free. Here's a great example. Why is Fudanari on here? Why is Fuda a slur? Nobody reasonable actually thinks that, but if you believe that Japanese Fuda porn is somehow oppressive, slurifying the word is a great vector of attack against it. It all depends on whether or not you can get it into the minds of enough other people that a word is just so bad that it shouldn't be said. If you can slurify the words you want slurified and protect the words that you want protected, you are able to shape the direction of discourse. So it comes as no surprise to me that the people who push X is a slur the loudest are also completely fine with being bigoted in some other way, because that way to them doesn't involve slurs. And at this point, it's just a belief in magical words, that evoking the dreaded end spell will summon dark mystical forces into our universe. After looking at all of these examples, it seems like there is nothing that actually makes a slur a slur. There's nothing stopping someone from taking any word as a slur, and acting like you've inflicted the gravest of injuries by unknowingly speaking a word they didn't like. Taking this principle to its extreme, there is no reason that somebody couldn't take every word as a slur, destroying the very concept of communication. At least if you live in a society that believes everybody's slurs must never be spoken. If instead you live in a society where we accept that slurs can be bad, but shouldn't be banned, where polite company will apologize for any mistaken offenses that occur, where good faith and free speech are valued, then the slur problem ceases to be a problem. Let's dive real deep into it, okay? What seems to be happening here is that slurs are not the same word with the same meaning as the word spoken normally. For example, when a person who's attracted to traps and finds Astolfo endearing and whatever else, and they say trap, they are saying a different word with a different meaning than the person who hates trans women and calls them traps derisively. It's spelt the same, it's pronounced the same, but it's a different word. And it's the same thing with all other slurs. You cannot square away a unified definition of the word nigga that is the worst, most racist, most insulting, most immoral sound to ever come out of the human throat that can never ever be spoken no matter what, while also simultaneously being featured prominently and proudly in the world's most popular music, listened to by millions of people, normalized to the point that people use it as a term of endearment. These two very different uses of the word must be two separate words in the modern vernacular. The only way you can claim that it's the same word is by bending yourself into the most amazing pretzels to try to justify the disparity, because you want the ability to insult people based on their race and you don't want anybody else to have that same ability. Which progs do all the time, because they want words to remain slurs so that they still have power while giving themselves license to say it. Which brings us back to the very beginning. Rather than the leftoids taking the L that Twitch handed them for using an anti-white slur, instead they have all doubled down. Vosh is ramping up his community for an email campaign. Hassan is making fun of the very concept of anti-white slurs, while still defending his use of the anti-Cuban Gusano slur used to describe anti-socialist Cubans. And their audiences are screaming about how cracker is not a slur because white people don't represent a unified culture the way that black people do, while still claiming that white people as a unified culture wield racist power. This is all obfuscation and nonsense. Any word can be used as a slur, as long as the use of the word points toward an underlying hatred. And any word that is normalized as a slur, but used without reference to that hatred, is not a slur. Here's what I mean. I can't find the video now. It was a Portland protest back in 2017, where Antifa was blockading roads and directing traffic. They did this dozens of times, and there's no way to actually find the video nowadays. But the video prominently featured two people, a shorter, slightly overweight woman and a large, angry man with long hair. The woman was directing traffic because Antifa believes that they can do that sort of thing, and one guy didn't want to turn. So the large, angry man came up and started smashing his car, while screaming with extreme vitriol, "You little white supremacist." You can make a very strong argument that considering the context and the hate with which he said it, he used the term white supremacist as a slur. So yes, anything can be a slur. It just depends on how you say it. But in my opinion, that's not the important part, because you should be allowed to say slurs. If the only thing that differentiates a slur from a non-slur is having hatred behind it, then to ban slurs is to ban hatred. And we cannot ban hatred. I wouldn't want to be friends with a hateful person, but I wouldn't want it to be made illegal to hate. The problem we're facing right now, though, is that the censorship of even the friendly use of slurs is creating more hate, not removing it. If I can get together with people who are not like me and throw around some banter, they get made fun of, I get made fun of, in the end we will be friends. Ironically enough, friendly use of slurs is what stops the race war from happening, which is why I don't trust any leftoid who claims not to be a racist while still wanting every single bad word banned.
I mean, I guess I can understand why some trans women would be offended by the word trap.
Mhm.
But I used it for myself. But if it applies to like femboys, like in like anime, that's just how the definition is. You thought it was a girl, but it has a dick and it identifies as a boy. It's haha. It's still hot though. Still would bang 10 out of 10.
You know what's great about this
But
conversation is that my video tomorrow is going to be about this topic.
hey, I mean, hey, if you want a section with me in it, would you want a section with me in it? I mean, you could ask me a few questions about it too.
Here's the
There
question,
too.
Lilith. Is trap a slur? Yes, no.
It depends. To me, I would say no.
Well, the thing is, Lilith, that's actually the
hmm
case for every single slur.